Hey, we're Kurt and Denette Schaer with the Broken for Better podcast.
Yeah, and together we're on a mission to equip and empower marriages. We want to strengthen families for everyday life.
Enjoy the episode. Hey, we are excited to be back talking about Highly Favored, the book. Again, it's coming out very soon, February 6th. And today, to have a conversation, I have asked one of my dearest friends. We go back to, I think we met when we were 10, right? 10 years old. I won't tell you how many years that's been, but it's been a while. And I think became fast friends like at age 12 or something, and have pretty much never left each other's sides as friends. In fact, if you read in the book, there's some stories in there I share about us a little bit, some of our journeys, some things you might not even know, because there's things I added after.
I was going to say, I don't remember those.
After I shared some pics with you. So even she'll be surprised by those things. But I'm really thankful just to have her here today. We're just going to talk a little bit about this journey and the why behind the book. And so I've invited one of my closest friends because I know that she won't be easy on me. And she'll ask some real questions when it just comes to the process and how we got here, and what I'm hoping that you get out of the book as you pick it up and you read it, no matter where you are on your faith journey, on your grief journey, on your trauma journey, whatever that looks like for you. I hope that it will breathe hope into you. So I just want to say, welcome, Jill.
Thank you.
This is my friend Jill.
Happy to be here.
So I'm excited to get started. So yes, we go back so far. In fact, our little ones, my youngest son, Logan, who you obviously will know the book is based on out of our trauma and grief, and her oldest daughter, Bailey, are only 3 weeks apart. And so a lot of our family memories, a lot of our stories are intertwined. And I already started crying.
Not a good start.
Sorry. Which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so along the journey, the good days and the really, really, really bad days, this girl's been there through a lot of it. So I'm honored that she would even be willing to have this conversation today and talk about the book, Highly Favored. Yes.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for entrusting me with this conversation, because I feel like on this journey of grief, I've let you take the lead. And I read the temperature of the room, your heart that day, and what's appropriate to talk about and what's not. So being in the position of asking the hard questions is not something I have done over the last 2.5 years. But you and I have both been through a lot together. But I don't think anything prepares you for the last 2.5 years. No. And I don't think anything compares to that. So we've done it together, and I've done my best, but I also was very much aware of my position being one of silence and just being there for on the days where maybe you were upset and you needed to vent, or if it was a day you were crying, or a day of nostalgia and talking about him. But I was just always very aware of my position and my need to just remain silent and watch for your lead, because I'm a helper and I'm a fixer. And it really just showed me my inability to fix. There was nothing I could do and nothing I could say to fix it, but I could be there. Yeah. And so it's been my honor to be there as the journey continues, and as you're writing this book and all the things. It's just been amazing.
So, and you've done so good with that. I know you well enough that that's been hard, right? Because you can't fix, you can't take anything away, you can't. And so I think a lot of friends will ask, and a lot of people have asked us, especially in the last couple of years, what's your advice for me loving on someone that's grieving? And you've done that so well, because you have let me lead with wherever I am that day. And some days, some people need an encouraging word, and some days people just need silence or just need your presence.
Right.
And so I'm just so thankful that I have a handful of friends that have been that, and have been so steady and constant but haven't withdrawn, because there's the both, right? So silence
Exactly.
and waiting for
Mhm.
someone to lead can also withdraw because you don't know what to do. So you haven't done that. Like, you've been present. And so I'm just so thankful
Hmm. Well,
for
thank you
that.
for saying that.
Oh, of
I have to
course.
say, for anyone that has experienced walking alongside someone in grief, there's just always the fear of saying the wrong thing
Yeah.
or, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. So hearing that is very affirming, and I appreciate it because it was with God's help.
Yeah.
Every day I drove over to see you, I would pray and say, God, give me the wisdom.
Yeah.
What does she need today? What do they need today? So
Yeah.
hearing that is very affirming, and thank you.
Yeah.
But I watched you. I mean, I've known you for so many years, and we've been through really, really cool things together. We laugh a lot
A
together.
lot. Yeah.
But we've been through some really hard times together too, but nothing like the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So in these 2.5 years, I've seen you grow and change so much.
Mhm.
In that time, what do you see in yourself as being the biggest change for who you are now as opposed to who you are before Logan went to be with the Lord?
Hmm. I think I just was unfamiliar with grief.
Mm.
Like, you lose a grandparent or someone that you not expect to lose, but sometimes there's a buildup to that loss, right? There's expectations, there's a sickness, or there's something. And especially like a grandparent, that's the natural order
Mhm.
of things, right? You expect to lose a grandparent.
Mhm.
Um, and then possibly a spouse, right? You don't expect or ever plan to lose a child.
Mhm.
And it's totally out of the natural flow that God created. And so um, I've heard multiple different people say, if you lose a grandparent, you lose part of your past, right? You lose a spouse, you're losing your present, but losing a child feels like you've lost your future.
Right.
And so for me, the biggest way I've changed, and I've changed in a lot of ways, I think obviously grief is the easiest one to name, right? I don't think I was familiar with it. No one wants to be. Um, but I think I've also lost a lot of, which I don't think I ever would have thought of this, but like even like my own judgments or like expectations of
Mm.
people.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, we're all given the same amount of time in a day, not necessarily the
Right.
longevity of how we
Right.
live, but like we're all given the same amount of time. And so I think prior to losing something so precious and so dear, I might have been a little more judgmental of someone's bad day
Mhm.
or expected more when someone was walking through something. And then when you are so brought down to your knees that you have nothing left to give, I think my expectations for others also drastically changed because it's like you don't know how hard or what kind of situation that person that day is walking through.
Right.
So I think probably those two would be the biggest. Um, but if I'm honest, it's difficult. That's a whole entire other arm of grief that I never knew existed, which is you feel like you yourself have changed so drastically that you don't even recognize yourself.
Right.
The things that you
Yeah.
declared, and this because you've seen the really dark days, right?
Right.
But the things that I would have preached or the things that I would have stood on so easily in the past, you're so cautious to voice them without knowing that they are 100% truth.
Mhm.
Or even with pandering your words in such a way that like you say them when you're not fully capable
Right.
of saying them.
Right.
Like singing a song at church that I might have mouthed that I maybe didn't fully believe.
Mm.
I won't do that anymore because for me it's like I don't have the ability to want to step into that fakeness, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. 100%. Well, it makes you a more authentic person because you realize how little control you have over situations in life.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure with that, and I watched you and I know your heart and I know how much you love on people and how much you serve people.
Mm.
But in that process, was there ever a difficulty for you with forgiveness or resentment
Mm.
or any sort of feelings that came up inside of you that you didn't expect to come to surface? Which I kind of know the answer.
Do you want the list?
I'll just the short list.
The short list. Definitely. Absolutely. Honestly, I stumbled on, and this is a great resource. There's a couple resources I'll share today for maybe a parent that's walking through this, but one resource I stumbled on very early on is a podcast called GPS, Grieving Parents Sharing Hope. And I was in a really dark place this one particular day that I literally was just stumbling through Spotify, like grief, parent, law, trying like anything that could give me a little bit of hope. And I found this lady's podcast that she had lost a daughter, and she did a whole series of podcasts on forgiveness. And I didn't realize how much unforgiveness I had in my heart. Like things like even forgiving your child for going before you. And that podcast, I was like, man, I didn't realize that I'm not angry at him, but angry at the scenario, like that he gets to be there first. Anger at myself that I couldn't fix the scenario, right? You have to forgive yourself that it's something out of your control. Forgiving others that maybe weren't able to sit in the dirt with me, or show up because they didn't know how to or didn't know what to say. People that you feel like you've given a lot to in the past that in your darkest moment didn't really help, weren't there. Definitely that. And then the biggest and is anger at God and forgiving not who I expected, or not who he is, but who I expected him to be. And some people don't walk through that. Some people are like, I was never angry at God. I can tell you I was angry at God. And I just expected differently. And that's a good portion of what this book is about. Not about my anger, but about some of the beliefs that I believed about who God was. And what I believed being a good Christian was, and what having that favored title means. And
not just the mountaintops.
Not just the mountaintops. And it might sound asinine to the person that didn't come from it. In fact, I'll throw my editor out there, Abby. She's an amazing editor, Abby McLaughlin. If you're looking for an editor, she's awesome. But she comes from a very reformed background. And so in reading my first edit, she said, I've got some questions because, like, did you really believe that being a believer and being faith-filled like owed you something? Because there's parts of this book that you feel like, man, I'm frustrated because God could have healed and he didn't. God could have protected and he chose not to. Like he let this slip through his hands. And so did you really believe that? And I said, absolutely.
100%.
And in the cultures that the church environment and the denominational background that I've had, that was in a lot of ways an expectation of mine. And her coming from a reformed background, she's like, man, I always felt like God was just waiting to smack me down. So she's like, I come from such the other extreme that I always felt like I was never going to live up. And it was almost like so battling those thoughts and then forgiving the things that I thought God owed me.
Right.
And that's been hard. Yeah.
But what do you think through that? So one thing I admire about you greatly is, first of all, as a friend that loves you so much, I treat you like family. And my knee-jerk reaction is help, be there, do whatever I can. And when I was hit with the reality of there's 0% chance I can do anything to help.
Right.
I can't say anything. I can't do anything. And then I would watch you every time I came over. And this is humorous because I'm not a big reader, but Denette would have a huge stack of books next to her that she had just read like the day before. But a lot of our conversations were about those books. And I would watch your face change, and it gave me hope because I would see these little glimpses of hope that you were getting, pieces of hope that things can get easier, things can get better. And I would just sit back and just be so encouraged by that, because as a friend, you see someone in the bottom of a pit going, are they ever going to be able to be okay? Because when I put myself in your shoes,
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I don't think I could have ever been okay.
Yeah.
And I was watching you not be okay, but have little pieces of hope.
Yeah.
And the authors of those books,
Mhm.
I think the ones that you were sharing with me were of parents that had lost a child.
Most of them.
Yeah. And so in that, I'm sitting here talking to you about a book you've written, which to me, 2.5 years later, just seems like a miracle that you were able to sit in those feelings and take the time to write a book. And so for me, I just wonder, first and foremost, how did you stay grounded to keep continuing taking those steps forward?
Mm.
And then what is your why behind writing this? Like, what's your purpose? Because I know those books gave you hope. So
Yeah.
what is your why? What is your purpose in writing this book?
You know, I have always loved to read, but it's usually been for fun, right? Or like on my side table, there was always usually some kind of humorous book, some kind of maybe leadership or whatever, worship book, and then some kind of self-help Christian book, right?
Right.
All I could read was books on grief. Like, and heaven. I needed to know where my son was. I needed to know all the answers that I had just kind of glazed past when I've, read about heaven or I've sat through, whatever. So I couldn't get enough of it. And I got so much hope knowing that someone else had lived through that and was still alive, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I have 2 other amazing boys that are here. And I have an amazing husband, and God hasn't chosen to take me home yet. As much as I still probably need to forgive him of that, right? Like, there's so many times I've uttered, why wasn't it me,
Yeah.
And so knowing that someone else had walked through their darkest moment, and a lot of them were on loss of a child, but there were other people that had lost multiple spouses, like maybe a spouse in the early age and then another spouse. And then there was one that had, paraplegic that had lived without being able to move her limbs her whole life, so there's all these different stories of suffering and loss that I gleaned hope from. And I honestly, I don't know that I believed I would finish a book when I started. I think I had hoped I would.
Yeah.
One day, but I really started writing because I felt like I didn't know how else to get out my emotions. And I had multiple people suggest the Book of Mary, which kind of, I'm just going to say it pissed me off, to be honest. There might be a couple words in the book too, so please sorry about that, but just being real. It pissed me off, and I was like, I didn't carry the Son of God. 2, God didn't tell me I was favored, and I don't want to know that, God gave me the strength to get through this, but so many people had mentioned it that I was like, maybe I just read the Book of Mary again. And so I started there. And I started reading it with different eyes, and it was all based on that word, favored, right? He calls this girl who we think is 14 or 15 years old, blessed and highly favored. And my whole life, with my church lenses on, thought that meant she was so good and so righteous that she was chosen to be the mother of the Savior, right? And she was. But also, like, what came with that?
Right.
Like, what cost did that come with?
The reality.
Yeah.
Walking through that.
The reality of knowing that and having to walk through that. And when she takes him to get blessed at the temple, he's basically told his life will be taken. She's told that. She doesn't know the timeline. She doesn't know when that happens. And so the extreme weight of carrying that, not even counting all the other things that she had to carry, like, that doesn't seem, with my theology or my previous theology to grief, to explain what a favored life looks like. Right. And so for me in writing, I honestly, it wasn't a matter of, I need to share this story. It was a matter of healing.
Yeah.
And so I started just reading. I started there reading that scripture differently. And then God took me to another one, and it was Naomi. And God kept bringing me to all these people that were called favored, but had tragic life scenarios.
Right. Right. My favorite chapter is Joseph. And not because the other ones aren't just as amazing. It's just I have kind of settled into his story over the last couple of years myself, and really tearing apart the details. And like you said, the reality. I feel like, and I think you said this in the beginning of your book, possibly. I know I read the unedited version, so I don't know if it's going to be there or not. But how we look at kind of the stories of the Bible as stories.
Right.
You know, we picture the felt board people that we saw, and it's a picture. And so for Joseph, he was given these dreams by God with this great purpose, and was going to be given authority.
Yeah.
And then he made it to the palace, and here he was being able to give grace to his brothers who threw him in the pit. But as you get older and as you experience more in life, you start seeing his pit and relating it to your pit.
Yeah.
And then unjustly thrown in prison, and what my prison is. And I feel like you and just my church world and growing up in it, I always looked at the mountaintops. The palace was the favor.
Right.
It's like, man, that's so awesome. He has the favor of the Lord on him. But God's favor is in the pit. God's favor is in the prison, and walking through those with purpose is where God's favor shows up. And that's one thing I think I have admired about your walk on this journey so much, is that you've been intentional in making the next step. And I am not saying that in like a religious big way of like getting up and speaking to a congregation. I'm saying like you made the next right choice to get out of bed the next day. And then you made the right choice of trying to get out of the house one day. And here you are, you've made the next right choice of writing a book. And I feel like sometimes when you haven't walked through the pit and through the valley, you look at God's favor as being on the end result.
Yeah.
Where there's so much preciousness that's revealed in the pit and in the prison. And I can't ever say I understand fully what your pit has felt like, but watching you walk through that and make the next right choice until you have reached the destination has been so admirable and so awesome to watch. But in that, I'm going to go there. I think about Logan.
Yeah.
And how proud he would be. And if he was here with us right now, what do you think he would say about this book? What do you think he would say about you? Because I know he loved his mama, and I know he would be so extremely proud, but I want to hear from your heart what you think he would think about this book and who you are now.
I hope he'd be proud.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard on the really bad grief days where you are just really ugly, pitching a fit, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And those are getting fewer and far in between, thank God.
Yeah.
But we are still only 2.5 years out, right? So I think on those days, you're like, man, I don't know that he would be proud, you know? But I hope he would be. I fully believe, as I read about that great cloud of witnesses that is cheering you on to the end of your race, right? I fully believe. And I don't think that they can see everything. But God must give them some kind of glimpse of the things that we're doing in the moments that the steps we're taking, because his word says that there is that great cloud, right? And I hope and pray that he's part of that. And I fully believe that he is cheering us on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it says in his word that we are united with our people immediately, like there's parts that can't wait for that moment. But until then, like, I hope while we're here, he's cheering us on. He's petitioning.
Mm-hmm.
petitioning for his family and for me and his dad and his brothers to just keep taking that next right step. That phrase, next right step, came from Elizabeth Elliot's book. And what's crazy about that fact is the fact that, I don't know if you remember this, but when we were, sorry, this is a little bit of a squirrel, but when we were in high school, I was in a play and I played Elizabeth Elliot on the stage. We did it with like the whatever. Anyways,
Gosh, it's
I
all over
played, I know it's been a while.
I have no idea.
And so even looking at like these glimmers of hope for me, like, I hope that Logan would be proud. I am trying to take the next right step, but the glimmers of hope for me, I have to let them boil down to these little tiny moments because the grief is so big, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the loss is so large and the hole is so gaping
Mm-hmm.
that you expect something large and big and gaping like to fill that hole.
Mm.
And that's not the way grief really works. It's like these little glimmers that you just kind of from your valley, like peek up and see. And so like that next right step and that moment reading that book, thinking, man, God had me play this character when I was 15 years old, that I would read her book one day and be encouraged. I had no idea at 15 when I was reading those words of hers that they would mean anything to me. I didn't know.
It's amazing.
And so I hope he would be proud, but I think the only way that I'm able to keep taking those steps is when I tell you, searching for those little glimmers of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can make you feel like a little crazy, right? Because you feel like maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe I'm searching for too much, making too much out of a little thing. But I think that's the only way that I can see God in those things is searching. You talked about dreams and Joseph's dreams and the pit and the palace. And we had dreams for Logan, right? And we know that God said he would preach the gospel and his life would change lives. He would preach the gospel and his life would change lives.
Yeah.
He was heading into Bible college the next year. He wanted to be a youth pastor. He wanted to be just like his mentor, Andy.
Oh.
And yet he preached one time, the Sunday before he passed, to some middle school students. Some gave their lives to Jesus. And so for me, some of the strength comes into, okay, this story has to matter. So I'm going to write out of healing. And now God's made it into this book. And so his life can still change lives, right? But in order for it to change lives, we have to be desperate enough to pursue that strength in order to continue to take these next right steps so that dream that God gave us years ago still comes to fruition. Like I'm sure when Joseph had those dreams, he never thought that it was going to cost him prison time and time being sold as a slave. And yet he had to keep making good choices good choices sounds very like elementary, but hard, hell-fought choices in order to see that dream come true.
Yeah. Difficult steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like as someone that has experienced so little in comparison, we can get paralyzed in not having the perfect setup for the next step. Like, well, I'm here. That's not going to happen. I'll have to wait until everything is perfect before I can take that next step. But I think the beauty comes in making that step by faith because none of the steps you have taken, I'm sure you have felt like taking. You've done it out of faith. But in that, so the books were good resources in giving you those glimpses of hope.
Yeah.
And like, where is my son? What does that look like? And where are these people now?
Yeah.
But what are some other things that have helped keep you grounded and like able to do things on purpose, with purpose, as you have continued to do what you just explained?
I think just not being scared to go there, not being scared to get the therapy that I needed. Grief therapy is not fun. It's not like, oh yay, I'm healed now.
Right.
That's not the scenario. And so that's been really difficult being around other parents that, I have a tissue on my face. I don't know how long it's been there.
Comes with it.
other parents that have been there, that can be really hard. It can be really triggering. You're walking into someone else's darkest moment. And for us, honestly, the first couple of years, we didn't even allow ourselves to do that because you feel like I can only cry with you. That's all I can give you. Like, and the moment that you walk into that loss, you are immediately, when I tell you, immediately thrown back into the depths of your grief. Like there's no like, oh, hey, I can hold your hand through this and not feel everything that you're feeling.
Right.
And so that's a hard thing to get into. But honestly, just not being scared to read the books, do the grief therapy, walk through the emotions, whether it's rage, whether it's highs and lows, whether more lows than anything. But here recently, we were able to go to an amazing retreat center in Arkansas. It's called While We're Waiting. And it's solely other parents that have lost a child. Being surrounded with a group that immediately knew exactly how you felt. And when I tell you those same lenses that I said shifted for me when it comes to judgment, there's no judgment. You can say whatever you want to say because we've all felt it. Whether or not someone's bold enough to actually have expressed it is another thing. But you immediately are surrounded by people that understand. And so just being bold enough to force yourselves, because when I tell you, especially like that we just did that recently. And I had almost a full panic attack walking into the door because I knew, okay, I can't keep my mask on today. I have to come into a room filled with other people whose masks are on the floor, shattered, and be okay to be bold enough to do that. And not know, will this help my soul or hurt my soul? Because there are some things that we have tried to step into that have done damage to our soul. We've tried, okay, this is what we should do. This is what we are supposed to do. And they've hurt and they've done the exact opposite or put us in an unsafe environment where we were just really triggered or held to expectations we weren't able to fulfill.
Right.
And so, being bold enough to be there, but also being bold enough to say, I need to leave this environment. I'm not capable. When you've walked through the trauma that we've walked through, and maybe the trauma that you've walked through, often what we do is we try to push it down and force ourselves into situations we're not quite ready for. And God doesn't ask us to do that. I think our cardboard testimonies we see, with, oh, I've been healed of meth addiction. I've been healed from depression. We all want those. And yet sometimes we are going to have things like Paul did, a thorn in our flesh, a thing that we can't fix this side of heaven. And unfortunately, grief and losing a child is one of those things. I'm not going to fix that here. And so I have to know that even in that moment, God isn't looking down, rushing me.
Right.
He's a long-suffering God.
Yeah.
He's a long-suffering God. And we say that phrase, so like, oh, he's a long-suffering God.
It means something different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, for years, I thought, oh, he's a long-suffering God, almost like I'm insufferable as a human. Like I cause so much heartache, I'm sure, to him because I'm so imperfect and I'm so broken and I have my imperfections that thank God he's a long-suffering God because I'm insufferable.
Right.
No. He's a long-suffering God. He walks alongside our suffering.
Right.
And that's different.
The way you said it about how you'll forever walk with a limp, I think it's such a perfect picture of how I had never looked at it before, because there's no healing.
Right.
It's something it's a journey until one day you're in heaven as well. You're on this journey.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're just fixed from it. It just means you learn how to live a little better in life. And I think that picture has always stuck with me since you said that. And I look at people's grief a little differently now, and not in the sense of, are you better? Like, well, today is a better day.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I am completely better. And it's something I'm daily dealing with in a different way every day.
Yeah.
And so I know what my position as your friend has looked like over the last 2.5 years. But And if I did anything wrong, I want you to be completely honest here. I want you to tell me what you would tell someone who is coming alongside a friend who has lost a child, and the best advice you could give them to be there for them in the way that would have helped you the most in this process. Like, how do you think a friend should handle that situation?
You know what's so funny? I'm reading a book right now, speaking of, by Jim Burns. It's actually on raising adult children. So I'm saying that because this is his words, not mine.
Okay.
But the title of his book is Leave the Door Open, or Leave the Welcome Mat Out and Your Mouth Shut.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that can sound really harsh. But what he's saying in that moment is, hey, unless your adult child is asking for advice, you want them to feel welcome, you want them to feel loved, you want them to feel accepted. And when they give you the credence or the ask for your opinion, then give it, right? And so I think when you're walking alongside someone that is walking through extreme grief, a crazy fact, you know, like if you struggle with grief more than a year, they say that it's prolonged grief. They actually have a name, it's like a disorder.
Oh, goodness.
But like even psychiatrists have said that's like asinine, especially for loss of a child. Like you don't get over that in a year, right?
So crazy.
But people will say things like, well, it's been a year, it's been this, it's been that. Unless someone has asked you, hey, I need your opinion on if I'm doing this well, don't give it.
Yeah.
Just be present.
Right.
Honestly, being present, not offering words. And often I think we say words to encourage someone else just out of our own frustration or out of our own uncomfortability.
Yes.
Like, I want you to be okay, so I've got to say something grand here to give you hope. And it's not our job to give hope. Unless Holy Spirit says, hey, I believe. Even some of those.
Still be careful.
Be careful. Yeah, Holy Spirit said, okay, be very careful when you use that.
But it could even be out of like a nervousness.
Absolutely.
So I know, people were always asking, what should I say?
Right.
Well, if you don't know what to say, don't
just
say
don't say.
anything.
Just being present,
Yeah.
checking in. People that are walking through a horrible loss, they're not checking their phones for the 1,600 texts that they've gotten or DMs or emails. And maybe at some point they go through those, but maybe check back in.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just, hey, I'm praying for you today. Love you so much. Praying for you and know that you're not alone if you ever, just letting someone know you're there is so important.
Mm-hmm.
So important. And that's been hard for those that haven't done that. And some of that does rest on us, right? You're so overwhelmed by your own grief that you aren't in a place to say, hey, let me ask for help, because then you feel as though you're just this leech, like it's not a fun place to be. Why would I want to bring someone else into it? Like,
right.
I'm miserable. I don't want my friends to be miserable.
Sit with me.
Come sit with me while I'm miserable. Come hold my hair while I cry.
Right.
And so it just seems so asinine to ask for help. And so if you have someone that's walking through it, it's literally just check in. Hey, I see you. I'm praying for you.
Yeah.
Hey, thought of you today, lifting you up. The smallest thing that is so small. But when you see them, not asking how you're doing, but just saying, it's so good to see you.
Interesting.
It's so good to see you. Because how you're doing is such a great question for the normal person that you run into.
Oh,
but for a person who's walking through extreme grief, I might have just had a crying spell in the car. Now I'm walking into the grocery store trying to be bold and carry on my next right step. And someone stops. The number of embarrassing encounters that I had one, that was so embarrassing. I might have mentioned, no, I think it was on something I wrote. But it was one of Logan and Caitlin's friends. And I was in the gym working out and I'd had a rough morning. No one would know that.
Right.
I had pulled myself together. I'm going to the gym.
You're working out.
I'm working out. I'm getting my yoga on, kind of. I'm so unflexible. But so I was proud of myself, and I'm there and I walk out and I see this friend of theirs. And she says, oh my gosh, how are you doing?
Mm.
And then immediately I'm in tears in the middle of Crunch Fitness, sobbing in my yoga pants. And it was not this sweet girl's fault at all.
No.
But it's just a phrase, right? And yet,
Yeah.
how are you is such a heavy,
That's a
heavy,
big question.
big
A
question.
big
And not like
question.
right now or
Yeah.
like today, like in an hour. I
What
don't
do you
know.
mean by that?
Yeah. And so that's a silly story, but yeah.
No, but it helps because I feel like so many people don't know. It's such an uncomfortable position,
yeah.
not at your fault, but like
Right.
because of people's discomfort with knowing how to have those discussions.
Yeah.
And I think it was either you or Kurt said one time, may have been in this podcast, I'm not sure. But you mentioned about calling and saying, "Hey, let me know if I can do something for you." Whereas
yeah.
maybe just keep checking in.
Mm-hmm.
Can I do something today? Or can I come over today? You know, not just leaving an open invitation for them to call back. But that was just something that I remember. And I was like, okay, noted.
There was our neighbor across the street at the time of the accident. He was a retired pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Knew him very, very little. We'd have interaction very little because he didn't speak good English. He was broken English, mainly spoke Spanish. And so we would always say hello and he'd say hi back. And throughout the years, we'd, how are you, whatever. Well, when the accident happened, our front porch plants started to die.
Yes.
And that man watered our plants
Mm-hmm.
every day or every other day.
Yeah.
For I want to say close to a year. I know it was like 6 to 8 months.
And they looked better
and then
than they did when you were taking
She
care
can
of them.
attest to them. He took way better care of my plants.
Sorry. That's
But
true.
I was just like, for me, it was like, that man was like,
Oh,
he was Jesus.
he was serving. Yeah.
He didn't ask. He saw a need. And obviously that could be creepy if you don't know the person, just going to their house and watering their plants. But he just showed up and watered our plants. He didn't say anything.
Yeah.
He didn't knock on the door. He didn't wave in the ring saying, hey, just so you know, I watered your plants.
Right.
He just
Just
served and showed up. And it was like such a small act of God's gracious heart that I got to see in action.
Mm-hmm.
And so for Kurt and I think for years, you protect yourself from pain. And we've said we want to do the opposite. Like we want to run towards it. Like when we see, and that's what that man did. Like he didn't run towards it to fix it.
Right.
He didn't run towards it to give us the answers. And he could have. He was a pastor, right?
Yeah.
He knew his word. He could have tried to say, hey, but have you thought about this?
Yeah.
Or God, no. He came and he watered our plants.
That's amazing. So sweet.
Yeah.
So
and so I just like water the plants.
Yeah.
Just show up. Just check in. And don't be scared. Set the reminder on your calendar. I know, and I'm so thankful for it, but I know there were people that set things on their calendar because they would check in on the month, right? Or they would check in.
Same day of the month.
Right.
Oh.
And but it was so touching to me that they would be gracious enough to do that.
Yeah. That you were on their list. Well,
yeah.
Before you wrap things up, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart how amazed and honored I am by you and to be your friend and watch you walk through this journey with so much grace. And it doesn't mean that it was always pretty, but I admire the grit that it's taken in you to make the right choice every day. And not that the choices have always been big, but to sit here almost feels surreal that we're talking about a book. You've written a book about this. And I am just so honored, first and foremost, to be your friend. And secondly, so proud of who you are today as a result of pain that could have paralyzed you. And you chose not to sit and be paralyzed. You chose to take the next right step. And I'm just so grateful, admire you so much, and love you so much. And I'm here for it. I can't wait to see how far this book goes in the lives that it touches and helps. And I know it will.
Well, thank you very much. I thank you for doing this with me.
Of course.
And I thank you a million times over for being the friend that you have been to me my whole life. So I'm very grateful.
I love you.
Because God knew I needed a Jill. So thank you.
I needed Denette.
So, so book is coming February 6th. You should be able to buy it on all the different platforms. We would be honored if you would just join us along for this journey. And or if you know someone that needs some hope, maybe has walked through loss, walked through some church hurt, walked through devastation, and is just really struggling to find hope. Feels like maybe God is against them. He's not. God's for you. He's not against you. And so we'd love and we'd be honored if you would check it out and share the word. Highly Favored is coming February 6th.
Yay.
And yeah, we're excited about it. So thank you for joining us. We will see you next week.
Thank you so much for watching.
Yeah, we encourage you, check us out on all of our socials at Broken for Better for more ways you can be plugged in.
Yes, and if we can help you or your family with anything like coaching or other resources, please connect with us at brokenforbetter.com.